master de recherche en administration des affaires, en administration et stratégie des affaires, intitulé The Role of Employee Empowerment in Crisis Management. Vous avez comme encadrant professeur ABDELFATTeh TRIKI et comme rapporteur professeur SARRA BERRAIES. Vous avez 15 minutes pour présenter votre travail et nous passons au débat.
Donc, tout d'abord, vous préférez en français ou bien en anglais? D'accord. Donc, hello everyone. I'm glad and honored. Everybody. I'm glad and honored that you are here today to evaluate my work and to be present. So, my work is about the role of employee empowerment and crisis management. It's directed by Mr. ABDELFATTeh TRIKI. We are following the outline, this outline. We will begin with the general context and problem statement. Then I will present research questions and objectives. Then the theoretical framework, the methodology, the results and finding, and finally, the contribution, limits, and further research. So we shall begin with the general context and problem statement. So many states are suffering now from the instability of the environment, the political environment, the social, and the ecological. So this instability causes many crises. These crises are with numerous types. First, we have some examples, like terrorist attacks in Turkey, Tunisia, Germany, and Belgium in 2016. Then Malaysia Airlines and Asia tragic crisis of 2014, and the Volkswagen financial crisis 2016. So crises with numerous types are threatening the organizational environment: economical crisis, financial, informational, physical, reputational, and even those related to human resources, psychopathic acts, and natural disasters. So the complexity of the current economic and the organizational situation demand an efficient crisis management process. So organizations are better to be more vigilant and to control efficiently their internal and external environment in time of crisis. They need to adopt a policy that empowers their human resources based on the fact that we believe that employees would be the main asset of the company in such critical situation. So our first and main question is, how can employee empowerment help organizations in dealing with crisis? So the research objectives are first to explore employee empowerment and crisis management practices, processes, and antecedents. Then to identify the most significant variables related to organizational behavior and managerial practices that lead the organization to an efficient crisis management process. Then the third objective is to develop a conceptual model that integrates both employee empowerment and crisis management. To attain these mentioned objectives, we have some research questions to be answered. First, how can business organizations empower their employees? Then, what are the managerial best practices that should be implemented to effectively assure employee empowerment? And who should business organizations empower? A specific crisis management team, or should organization empower all employees? Which crisis management process should the company adopt after empowering its employees? And how this would lead to the organization to get out of crisis with minimal losses? So the theoretical framework that we based on, first, literature review. Many authors and theorists mentioned employee empowerment and studied it as a concept, an emergent concept, such as Conger and Kanungu in 88, Thomas and Veldhuis in 90, Baum and Lawler in 94, Spritzer, Chris Ivories, Brown and Harvey, and Grisley. So employee empowerment is the practice of empowering individuals, is delegating power, sharing decisions making, provide a certain level of flexibility and can be the main reason of managerial and organizational effectiveness and efficiency. So this is the employee empowerment as a definition. There are two types of empowerment. There are psychological empowerment and structural empowerment. In this study and this research, we are focusing on the structural empowerment as the managerial practices. Organizations can change organizational policies, processes, practices, and structures from top-down control systems to high involvement practices in which power, knowledge, information, and rewards are shared with the employees at the lower reaches of the organizational hierarchy. This is how it's defined by Spritzer. So just to make the difference between the two types of empowerment, psychological empowerment is the internal motivation of employees, and structural empowerment is the organizational practices. So as Bowen and Lauer focused on empowering practices that include delegation of decision-making from higher to lower organizational levels and increasing access to information and resources from higher to lower levels. So when we say employee empowerment, we say these antecedents: work environment, rewards and incentives, skills and knowledge, self-esteem and locus of control, autonomy, information and communication resources, and optimization of processes and working methods. Then, crisis management. So, crisis management is a process designed to prevent the damage a crisis can inflict on an organization and its stakeholders. As crisis management is not just one thing. Crisis management can be divided into three phases: pre-crisis, crisis, and post-crisis. So pre-crisis is the phase where we can detect signals and prevent and prepare the organization to face the crisis. Once we talk about the crisis phase, we say damage containment, and the third phase is post-crisis, where are the recovery and the learning. Based on the theoretical framework and the literature review, we proposed a primary theoretical model, conceptual model. So there are independent variables, dependent variables, and the result of the model. The independent variables. There are some managerial practices such flexibility, credibility, simplicity, and delegation of power. Those practices would allow employees to be empowered and to feel more empowered in the organization to effectively manage the crisis. Once they feel empowered, they will feel more self-efficacious, efficient, and more persistent, and they will have more sense of responsibility, more self-supervision, and more sense of initiative. Then, the other dependent variables are related to the crisis management process. So the pre-crisis stage, the crisis stage, and the post-crisis stage. In every stage of the crisis management process, empowered employees would have an important role and an effective role more than the other normal employees. And finally, the result of the model is the crisis with minimal losses. When we empower employees and we have a crisis management based on these employees, empowered employees, we will have a result which is we are going to get out of crisis with minimal losses. Now the methodology. So our research is an exploratory research for the three reasons that we identify situations or complex event conditions or properties Then we accumulate facts and develop propositions and see how organizations work and clarify the involving variables. Then we used a qualitative approach, complex textual description, and effective in identifying intangible factors. And the interview guide is based on three main parts. First, the crisis experience, then the role of employees in dealing with crisis, then employee empowerment practices and its impact on the organizational behavior, and finally, the role of empowered employees in crisis management. We had three in-depth interviews with three experts in management that belong to the top management of three companies, which is Bona Group and Agile and Eva the aircraft. The questions were open-ended, and we respond to the criteria of data diversity. So the companies are belonging to three different sectors, and they are both private and public and another startup. Data analysis. So we analyze our data based on the software NVivo 11, which is qualitative data analysis software. And it's based on the coding procedures. There are principal nodes and secondary nodes. And we made two types of analysis, lexical and thematic analysis. And we based on two approaches, the deductive approach and inductive. So the lexical analysis and the thematic analysis. The lexical is to evaluate the term's frequency and occurrences, and the thematic analysis to convey the elements involved in the process of dealing with crisis based on employee empowerment. There are the examples of nodes, principal nodes, and secondary nodes. This is the coding list that we've based on to analyze our data. Now we pass to the results and findings. First, the lexical analysis. So our results showed the synergy between theoretical and empirical aspects of the study. First, to understand our data, we made a classification based on several categories of terms. Here there are the categories. First, managerial terms, strategic terms, situational terms, involvement terms, empowerment practices terms, and behavioral terms. So the managerial terms show that employees had the highest occurrence, and also the situational terms shows that crisis has the highest occurrence. This shows the synergy between the two terms, employees and crisis. Then, strategic terms show that environment, internal, managerial, operational have the highest occurrences, which means that organizations need to count more on the internal environment and to be operational and to adopt many managerial practices to empower their employees. Then the involvement terms show the highest rates of involved behavior, implicated, belonging. So when the managers use managerial practices, the employees became more involved and more implicated, and they will feel the sense of belonging more. Empowerment practices show that with flexibility, with motivation, with training, and with communication, the employees feel more empowered. And finally, the behavioral terms show that empowerment would make the employees more responsible, more persistent, and more productive, and more efficient. Thematic analysis. So lexical analysis seems to be insufficient since we need to understand deeply the role of employee empowerment and crisis management. So we conducted a comparative thematic analysis to see how organizations manage crisis and if they consider the importance of employee empowerment in such situation. So yes, the answer is yes. Companies Avianak Nevada Aircraft, Bona Group, Agib consider that employee empowerment is important in dealing with crisis, and it will surely conduct them to having a crisis with minimal losses. And there are some percentages that show the reality and the evidence of such facts. So they are based in managerial practices that will influence organizational behavior, and the crisis management is generally composed of 3 stages: pre-crisis stage, crisis stage, and post-crisis stage. To understand more the results, we have a table of managerial practices. So there are some propositions that are based on the theoretical framework and that have been confirmed in the empirical phase, such flexibility, credibility, simplicity, and delegation of power would surely influence the empowerment of the employees. Then empirical findings showed that also training and strategic alignment would influence the employee empowerment. Then then the managerial practices that are mentioned already influence organizational behavior, and this generate more self-efficacy, self-supervision, sense of initiative, sense of responsibility, persistence. And in addition to the theoretical framework proposition, we came out with 2 additional variables: involvement and consciousness. So the principal results are that employee empowerment is considered as a managerial tool that can help organizations in crisis management process and in the ordinary business activity. Also, employee empowerment is a result of a set of managerial practices that organizations generally implement. First, flexibility, credibility, simplicity, and delegation of power, training, and strategic alignment. Organizational behaviors such as consciousness, involvement, persistence, self-efficacy, self-supervision, sense of initiative, sense of responsibility, appear as a set of consequences of employee empowerment. And empowered employees generate a set of organizational behavior that is essential to deal with crisis. In sensitive situations, organizations need empowered employees with high levels of involvement, consciousness, and self-efficacy, etc., to count on and to be sure that they will persist and take correct initiatives until the crisis exits. Empowered employees also manage effectively the crisis management process. They are able to expect a crisis, prepare themselves to face it and to learn from it, deal with damages and losses, update the crisis management plan with top management, and develop a new plan if it's necessary. Managers did proclaim that employee empowerment helped them to improve the efficiency of crisis management and led their companies to assure minimal losses after crisis occurrence. So here it is the final theoretical model based on the theoretical reviews, the literature review, and the empirical findings. So we have a managerial dimension where we find the managerial practices such as flexibility, credibility, simplicity, training, strategic alignment, and delegation of power. Then the individual dimension, so how the employees will receive the empowerment. They will be more involved, more conscious, more self-efficient, more self-supervised. They have more sense of responsibility, more persistent, and and they take more initiatives. Then the organizational dimension, empowerment would influence the crisis management process, which is composed of 3 stages: pre-crisis stage, crisis stage, and post-crisis stage. And after that, we will have a crisis with minimal losses based on our main asset which is empowered employees. So finally, the contribution, limits, and further research. Our first contribution, which is theoretical, is the development of a conceptual model that integrates both employee empowerment and crisis management. Then, the methodological contribution is the use of a qualitative approach based on data generated by NVIVO 11 and responding to data diversity criteria. Managerial contribution is proposing managerial practices and strategies to which business organizations should refer to deal effectively with a crisis. And our limits are: our varied sample responds to diversity criteria, but it's a small sample, so we still can go further and study various industries and services companies' cases. This study so can not be generalizable for two main reasons. First, our sample does not represent all business sectors. Then the study ignores the individual psychological level of empowerment, since the interviews concern only top and middle management. Further research. So we can study organizational culture, knowledge management, and technological knowledge as moderator variables and integrate them in our theoretical model. Then study and compare employee empowerment in both private and public sectors, since they display some different characteristics and practices. Study the after effects of employee empowerment and if this can lead to a power struggle between employees themselves or between employees and managers. Study the relation between the type of business activity and the type of potential crisis that threaten the organization, and conduct a study to identify best managerial practices for every type of crisis. Thank you for your attention. Questions, comments?